it's happening, folks, and that's why I wanted to put that particular clip in, not to be doomsday-ish, but to be a call to action, because there could be no more important call to action than the one that His Holiness gave to us, which was to say, he said some just very, very beautiful things, but his main thrust was, we've got about 2 generations left. He said, in 70 years, this planet will be uninhabitable. So you better get going and better get doing and bringing this information, which whether it comes from Nassim's work in physics or from Robert's work in mathematics, or it comes from Shakespeare telling us about it in advance 400 years ago to say, get smart. I know this stuff is important, and it's in the, look at the pyramid. It's telling you something. I mean, that you couldn't, the message could not be clearer. So what's your take on that, Jamie, in terms of let's do the fun part first, getting over there and actually being in that room with His Holiness. What was your impression?
Well, first of all, it had to be just about one of the greatest honors of my lifetime so far, to be a fly on the wall, to witness Alan and Robert and Nassim Haramein take turns explaining their work to His Holiness the Dalai Lama, with the Dalai Lama sitting in a chair with 2 translators. And the most striking was watching and witnessing and being able to tell His Holiness absorbing the information and getting lit up by it and seeing the dots connect in his head the way anybody would have the dots connect when they hear some of this stuff. So Nassim was like, okay, here's my moment. I'm going to explain my theory that I've been working on for 30 years to His Holiness. And he just went at it, and he had charts, and he was showing him all this stuff, and he was like leaning over into it, and he's saying all this stuff. And at one point, Nassim was just like, yeah, and we found the smallest little particles that make up everything, you know, like kind of the pixels of our existence. And His Holiness was like, oh yeah, we have those in Buddhism called consciousness particles. Nassim is like, what? You have consciousness particles? But at one point, His Holiness was like this. He's talking to Nassim, and he goes, puts his glasses down like that, looks at Nassim, he's like, yeah, but what keeps all those particles together? And it was almost like His Holiness was like, I've got Nassim now, I'm going to stump him on this one. And Nassim goes, oh yeah, we figured that out. It's angular momentum. It's a spin. And it was right then, I think, His Holiness went, hold on a second. And he goes, he says a bunch of stuff in Tibetan, and we're all looking at each other. You want to tell that part about it, Alan?
Well, we all agreed in advance, didn't we? We said, look, the thing to hit him with is Nassim has actually proven that the entire universe fits inside one proton. That's a big thing, because His Holiness had a book out about 12 years ago called The Universe in a Single Atom. It's exactly the same concept, right? Omnipresence, omniscience. The entire thing is here and everywhere here, in every single proton, right? It's right. So that's the concept. So we thought, well, we know he will click on that. So we'll push Nassim forward. Let Nassim go, I'll give it a little bit of Shakespeare, Robert will give it a little bit of equations. Here's Nassim to tell him, we just proved, not just my numbers show it, but that in 2013, we had the Large Hadron Collider at CERN run the experiment, and Nassim's numbers were 0.0003% out, something like that. Like, so good that probably it's the Large Hadron Collider that's wrong, not the numbers, because it's just not accurate enough. So he actually had his theory actually corroborated And of course, the academics don't like that because he's not in the club and he's not a PhD. So I face the same thing in the Shakespeare world. You face the same thing. We all face the same thing. Ooh, you didn't go to the right school. But when he said that, the Dalai Lama turns to one of his translators and goes, he speaks very good English. I mean, it's not that he needs these translators, but occasionally a word or two, he'll want to sort it out. He talks and talks and talks, and then all the other lamas, there must have been 20 of them around, right? They all scurried like cockroaches out of a room when you switch the light on. I thought, what on earth happened? It was, he said something, we didn't know what he said, and then he carries on. And we're talking, and we're still talking, and we're still talking. We're thinking we'll get 45 minutes with him, and it's at an hour, you know. And then he suddenly says, right, let's go have lunch. And we're in his private quarters then, having lunch for another 3.5 hours. And what happened? And then Lama Tenzin told us afterwards, he said, well, what he said was, this is going to be longer conversation. Prepare lunch. And if it's not too self-serving, it's worth saying, because not for our own importance, but for the importance of the topic. Lama, who organizes these things, Lama Tenzin said, I've been doing this for 30 years and he's only done that twice before. Once was Desmond Tutu and once was Michelle Obama, where you got invited to lunch. Now we didn't know it was that special. Well, we did. I mean, we were all just humbled and blown. But you know, we're just sitting there like, he's drinking tab and having potato chips and you're thinking, oh, wow. And it went on for a long, long time. But at the end, he said, he wasn't doomsday about it. He said, we can fix this, but the planet is in real terrible shape. And what you have got here is important, and it must be brought out to not just the general public, but to ways in which we can change the status quo. Now, so here's the interesting part, isn't it? We all came away from that thinking, well, that's great. How do we do that? We talked for a couple of days about, let's call it convergence. Let's organize. But then you think, well, you got to organize all the people. You got to get Deepak Chopra, and you got to get Oprah, and you got to get other, you know, the big names who are going to attract more and more people, and you got to pick a city, and you got to get all the hotels booked, and you got everyone's schedule be right together, and what's that going to cost, and how are we going to do it? Because the Dalai Lama said, he said, you do this and you get it together and it's a success. He said, we can take it to the United Nations. He said, we can take it to the United Nations, which means, you know, him. He's got contact to the United Nations. He can go talk wherever he wants, right? So that's, we were being given our marching orders. This is important, go do it. And we were thinking, well, that's hard. Now, not to minimize at all the pain that everyone is in right now as a result of this pandemic situation. At the same time, you've got to look at the rainbow behind the cloud of it. What is it allowing us to do? And from that perspective, all of a sudden, as you and I have just spoken about recently, Jamie, take the ball with that. What can we do now that we couldn't do before? Because we can do it on Zoom and it won't cost a thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tall order when the Dalai Lama looks at you as a group and says, sure, that's a really good idea. You should do that. Do a conference where science meets spirituality, and I'll join you. And we were like, okay, how are we going to do that? Because then Lama Tenzin's like, okay, well, His Holiness doesn't fly really far anymore. He'll fly some, but not really far. So we were like, where are we going to do this and all this? But if we could organize a conference, that would be awesome.
Well, let's just cut to the quick on that. Because honestly, seriously, there's no more important subject. There's no more important. I mean, if you're actually saying my grandchildren might not have an earth to live on, that's pretty darn important. We know from history that it happens. Civilizations get wiped out and we start all over again. And to the divine, it's just a blink. Oh, well, we tried that. Let's try this. true, isn't it? I mean, if we are all the divine and get used to it, you are, we are. Nobody dies. Eternal. Soul is eternal. So you are it. And if we are it, and we don't use the power that we have got as it, then we should be ashamed to have let this moment go by and say, well, you know, yeah, maybe there'll be another cataclysm, maybe there'll be another flood, maybe there will be a solar flare, maybe we'll be off the grid and we'll be back to the Stone Ages, maybe, all right. And we were this close to having utterly it all, the entire power of everything in a proton. Bam! There is no lack. There is no scarcity. It is all, sorry to say it, it's a game played by those who wish us to think there is scarcity and lack, and there is none. Now, we could not be at a more pregnant moment then to be able to do something about it, and all of a sudden, it's common. Everyone's getting used to doing what we're doing. Oh, let's meet by Zoom, all right? We could pull a conference together with 50 Zoomers or 200. I was just on one the other day with Mark Rylance, the most esteemed Shakespearean actor, the most esteemed actor, period. And he was on a conference that he runs in London with about 250 Shakespeare fans, because he's passionate, absolutely passionate about this issue. Who was the real Shakespeare? The reason I say all that is because we're now doing that. For whatever is the downside of COVID, there is this upside that all of a sudden it's entirely possible to pull this together with a few passionate people who say, hey, it's time, let's do it. Do you want to be on a show where the Dalai Lama has said, put it together and he will join us? Would you like to be on a Zoom with the Dalai Lama? Let me think. Gee, I'm busy next week. No one's going to say that. Nassim would delight in it. Who does Nassim know and love? You know, he's got 1 million followers, one of whom happens to be Sting, one of whom happens to be other name droppings that we could do. We can get we can get the world's top musicians together. We can get the world's top actors and the world's top people who all feel positively passionate about this and do something about it. And do you think it will flop? Do you think there'll be a sort of I don't know. What are we waiting for? We've been given the go-ahead. Here he is. I'm going to show you a picture of His Holiness. He's sticking his tongue out at me. There's Nassim. He's sticking his tongue out because he just made a joke. And the joke was, he said, I asked him a very cheeky question, really, because by then we'd been at it for 3 hours, and I felt as though, oh, well, we're just old friends. I could ask him anything, you know. The audacity. But actually, that's the truth, right? Why aren't we old friends? We are old friends. We could not be closer. We are the same being. There's only one of us. Why don't we feel like old friends? And so I said, I can't be the first person to have commented on this, but I said, please, Your Holiness, tell us. As you said that you might not reincarnate again, which is a shocking thing to say because he is a bodhisattva. The Bodhisattva vow is, I will reincarnate over and over and over again, and so long as one single sentient being is in pain. Imagine, Yogananda said the same thing, the Bodhisattva vow. Yogananda, Paramahansa Yogananda says in one of his poems, I will ply my boat, if need be, 1 trillion times, so long as one stray brother or sister is still in delusion. It's inconceivable what that means, such unconditional love. A being that can stay in utter divine bliss for the rest of eternity, but knows that he or she cannot. Why? Because even going home to divine bliss recognizes, oh, the rest of me is still out there, and that's me. That's still me out there. I have to come back. There's no such thing as going home and resting on your laurels. So that's the Bodhisattva vow. And he says he will come back. And then he says to his people, I might not. So I actually asked him this very cheeky question. I said, that was a political move, wasn't it? Did you say that in order to, when you pass, and the Chinese say, oh, we've chosen, our guy has chosen the next Dalai Lama, your people can then say, no, 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 we don't accept that because our guy said he wasn't going to reincarnate. Ah, trap. And he looks at me with this sly look and he says, oh, yes, yes. But I have done some internal investigation. I have now think Chinese getting much more clever, thinking good, thoughts about Buddhism good for economics and for business and for mind and everything getting better. And I think I will live to be 113. And when I do reincarnate, maybe not in India, maybe not in Tibet, maybe further west. And he looks at me because I'm the only English person in the room, and he goes, but not in Europe, ha! And he sticks his tongue out at me. And they capture this moment. Nevertheless, the whole point is that's the Bodhisattva vow. I'm going to come back as long as anyone is hurting. It is beyond normal human comprehension, but get used to it. That's the truth. Shakespeare says, in one of my favorite scenes in Twelfth Night, he assigns these words to, which should be a comfort to all of us. He assigns these words always to the fool, or to, in Twelfth Night, Sir Toby Belch, who's a drunkard, which is just perfect, you know. And this drunkard is walking around, and he says his lines in the scene, and then something happens, blah, 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 blah. And then as he's walking out, he just goes, it's all one. It's all one. It's got nothing to do with the play, and people sometimes cut it out. And it happens 4 times. It's all one. Twice from the drunkard, twice from the clown, saying, it's all one. There's only one. There's only one consciousness. There's only one of us pretending that we are different beings. It's terribly important. I just think, what are we waiting for?